Hello loves, and welcome to my January wrap-up. In the month of January, I completed 31 books, and I'm here today to tell you what those were and give you my thoughts on each of them. As a disclosure, I will not be discussing a couple of the books that I read in January as they were published by SMP, St. Martin's Press, or one of their associated imprints. I will be supporting the Readers for Accountability and not providing any marketing for St. Martin's Press titles, and I will put some information in the description down below on why that boycott is occurring. We're gonna switch it up this time and do the reviews in lowest rated to highest rated. So starting with the lowest rated books that I had this month, my lowest rating was a 2.25, and that was for 50 Shames of Earl Grey by Andrew Schaefer, or Fanny Merkin, the pen name. This is a parody of 50 Shades of Grey, and definitely no longer timely to read in 2024, but it was a book that I was gifted and I wanted to get it read and decide if I wanted to keep it or not. When 50 Shades of Grey was at its peak, it was a very popular thing to make fun of, so I'm not surprised that a book like this exists, and I think there is a way this could have been done that would have been interesting and unique and funny and clever. I don't think this book did that. It kind of played with the idea of him being a dungeon master in the nerdy roleplay way, but it seemed like the author maybe didn't know enough about that community to make that interesting as a metaphor and devolved it back into being sexy times. It just took a lot of the low shots that you would kind of predict and didn't really do anything unique with the parody. So this is my lowest ranked of the month at a 2.25 star. Next, at 2.5 stars, we have two books. The first one is Moxyland by Lauren Bukes. This is a kind of cyberpunk genre novel set in South Africa. The book follows four perspectives. You have Kendra, who is an art school dropout who agrees to test out this new tech. Laredo, who is working for a corporation and is looking for ways to kind of undermine the corporation's efforts. Tendeka, who is a activist who is pushing for more and more extreme ways of fighting against the system. And Toby, who is kind of the common thread between the three other characters, and the description on Storygraph says he's a blogger, which yes, that is true, but honestly, some of the issues I had with this book is the fact that his character was not consistently written throughout. The first introduction we get to him, from his perspective, he's like talking a lot of slang. Later, he is having a conversation with Laredo and he's just talking completely normally, even within his own head. So it's really weird how he was written, in my opinion. The plot, honestly, was barely memorable, and it took like 70% of the book to even get started on a plot because it was so busy establishing each of these characters and their role within the world. It just did not work for me. One got a 2.5 star. The other 2.5 star was so disappointing to me. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which I was really looking forward to as a book about Shakespeare, but from his wife's perspective. The story was really about the domestic life of someone in the Elizabethan era, and it was kind of giving me Little House on the Prairie vibes, with the like, how I need to meet my husband, but my father won't approve, and then, oh no, I'm afraid of dying in childbirth, and it's just not my kind of story. I'm a fantasy, horror, science fiction reader, so that was not my type of book, and it's a bummer because I do really enjoy Shakespeare. 2.5 for Hamnet. I'm sure it is beautifully written if that is a plot that you are interested in enjoying, but not my thing. Next, the books that got a 2.75 rating. The first book that got a 2.75 for me was the Amityville Horror by Jay Anson. This is an allegedly nonfiction telling of a family who moves into a house and weird stuff starts happening and they think the house is haunted. There's just, the vibes are off. I didn't know this was a nonfiction book going into it. I only found out it was nonfiction when I went into Goodreads to rate it and saw what category it was under. I thought that it wasn't very a satisfactory narrative, which it makes more sense if that's a nonfiction because real life isn't going to have a satisfying ending. But it's just like, all of this spooky stuff happens and then they move out of the house. And that's it. No explanation, not that I needed one. But even the stuff that was happening was really inconsistent and didn't seem to have any rhyme or reason to it. This wasn't a good horror fiction and wasn't particularly a satisfying nonfiction story either. So this one got a 2.75 from me. The other one that got a 2.75 from me was The Invasion by K.A. Applegate. This is the first book in the Animorphs series. In the Animorphs books, there is an alien species who comes down to Earth and there's a competing alien species. So the first alien species gives some children the ability to turn into animals to somehow fight the aliens. A Discord server I'm on suggested doing a read-along to this book. It is not something I would have picked up for myself, and predictably, it just was a little too young for me. I didn't find that the characters were interesting or that the stakes felt particularly high, but they are children. They don't need the stakes to be that high. And it was like a 4-hour audiobook, so it's not like it's going to be lengthy enough to really flesh things out. And I don't even think this is the kind of book I would have enjoyed if I was a child. It isn't the kind of stuff I read. So a 2.75 for me. I'm sure there are children out there who really enjoy these books, and I know there's adults who have a nostalgia for them, but I think I missed the window on it, and even if I was in that window, it wasn't really my type of book. Next are the 6 books that I gave a 3-star rating to. The first is Ouran High School Host Club. This is a manga series about a scholarship student at a private school who accidentally breaks a very expensive vase and is forced to become a host in the host club, where rich kids pay other rich kids to basically pretend to date them. I really enjoyed the anime when I was in university. It was something that would just wipe my brain of all the stress. So I was interested to see how the manga was, and I'm probably not going to continue in this series. I did give the first one 3 stars. It did have some interesting plot elements in it, but for me, the art style was just a bit busy on the page, and it got hard to follow what was said by each character, which were like thoughts and which were asides and which was just describing what was on the page. So it's not my style of manga. I prefer mine to be a bit more straightforward to follow. I would recommend watching the anime, and if you are a fan of the more busy style of manga, certainly something you can check out. It just wasn't the style of manga for me, though I did enjoy elements of it. Another manga I gave 3 stars this month is volume 14 of Blood on the Tracks. This is a manga series about a boy who has a very unhealthy dependent relationship with his mother, and she does a very violent act that he's a witness to, and he starts to unpack his complicated feelings around his relationship with his mother. In a couple volumes ago, there is a time jump of like 20 years. In this volume, the older version of our main character gets a phone call from the police station, and his mother is clearly showing some memory issues, and he is asked to come pick her up because she's been wandering the streets. And I'm very worried about the author of this series. The author notes make some very concerning things. So I don't know where this is going from here. I gave it 3 stars because I am still enjoying the art style of it. I think it's really well drawn. I just don't know where the plot is going from this point, and I'm not so sure if I'm interested anymore. I think there's only a couple issues left, so I will probably see out the rest of the series, but if it goes on too much longer, unless it picks back up, I might abandon the series. Next 3-star book for me was Urn Burial from the Phryne Fisher series. These are written by Carrie Greenwood. The premise of the series is there's a wealthy woman in Australia in the 1920s, and as a hobby she solves crimes. In Urn Burial specifically, she is invited to this manor kind of out in the country, and while she is there, she thinks she sees someone's dead body, but then when she goes back and alerts people to go see the body, it has disappeared. So we're unsure if this person has died or just disappeared or what Franny saw. I gave this one a 3-star. The plot was fairly decent. I thought the climax of it was pretty interesting. However, it was something that I picked up on in the last book and didn't end up mentioning in my wrap-up, but it was very blatant in this one. There's a lot of Orientalism in it. There's some uncomfortable things said about Franny's current beau, who is a Chinese man. And while the main character, Franny, clearly speaks out against the people who are being racist against him, I don't know if it goes far enough in terms of justifying why this is in the story at all. I'm interested to see where it goes in the next one with this partnership. I might end up not finishing this series. I'm no longer really enjoying the mysteries enough to put up with xenophobia that seems to be throughout these books. I know it is realistic to the time period, but it's not something I particularly want to enjoy in what I'm picking up as a lighthearted palate cleanser mystery. The next book that got 3 stars from me is Her First Palestinian by Zaib Tibi. This is a series of short stories about the experiences of Palestinian immigrants in Canada. This is a series of short stories written by one person. If this had been nonfiction stories of people's real lives, some of the mundanity of the stories could have been a bit more justified because they are real lives, not something someone is creatively coming up with. If this had been from different authors, I would understand the inconsistency in the quality because some people are better writers than others. There was one story that is like the very last story in this collection that I thought was so well done. I gave 5 stars. I would read that story. I would recommend that story. There are maybe one or two before it was so creepy I almost didn't want to finish the book because this is not a horror book. So why is this a story about a creepy stalker, basically, that is kind of written to make it seem romantic? Yikes. If you are picking up this book, just skip to the last one in it. It's the one about the father who is trying to develop a new technology to help his daughter who has a chronic disease and ends up having to sell that technology to someone he doesn't want to sell it to. That story was amazing. The one about the post-it notes, creepy. That's why it ends up at a 3, because we had just a very differing level of quality throughout these stories. Next book that gets 3 stars is actually the first book that I read in January, my first book of 2024, and that was Mystery of the Whale Tattoo by Franklin W. Dixon. This is one of the Hardy Boys novels. It is a children's series about the 17-year-old Hardy Boys who solve crimes together. I originally picked this up because I have a whale tattoo and I thought owning the Mystery of the Whale Tattoo would be funny as someone who has a whale tattoo. So I did not have expectations going into this that it was going to be a 5-star read. It was a joke purchase. I gave this a 3. There were some elements here that I liked. It was a little out there. I was expecting like pirates, sailors, but it was about a circus and like a very large stuffed whale that goes missing. There was some fat shaming in here, which was uncomfortable, but some elements of the mystery were fun. So I ended up giving this a 3. If you're nostalgic for the Hardy Boys, maybe you would enjoy this. I wouldn't say this is a bad book. It is a artifact of its time. And the last book that I gave 3 stars in the month of January was Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. This is the story of some elderly ladies who are in like an all-female hit squad, and they are aged now, and they go on a cruise to like kick off their retirement, and then someone tries to kill them. And then they get framed for killing someone else, and so it's kind of a rogue spy story. And I gave this 3 stars. It was all right. The characters had some clever things. I'm just realizing spy stories aren't for me. I don't really like the spy secret organization things. This was maybe just a genre I'm discovering is not for me. So I gave this 3 stars because I don't want to discourage anyone else from reading it. It just wasn't a book for me in terms of the type of genre it was. Now we'll move on to the books that I gave a 3.25 star to, and this is another book that made me discover a genre that's maybe not for me, and that is Vampires of El Norte by Isabella Cañas. This is a kind of gothic horror novel about a wealthy woman and a farmhand on her father's land who kind of have a friendship, and when they are children, she's attacked and he thinks she's dead, so he runs away. And then later on, he finds out she actually wasn't dead this whole time, and there's vampires. I enjoyed some of the elements about it with the vampires, the climax specifically on how they deal with the vampires in the end, I thought was really interesting, but it was another romance where my papa says we can't marry because you are beneath me. I just don't like those stories. I don't know why. That's not my thing. There was a lot of that going on and not enough of a, oh my god, vampires are real and attacking us. This one got a 3.25 for me. It was beautifully written. Some of the horror elements were cool, but a bit too much focus on that romance, which is not the type of tropes I am interested in a romance. So a 3.25. Another 3.25 for me was Below by Laurel Hightower. It is a short novella, so it was a pretty quick read. This has Mothman on the cover, and Mothman is my favorite cryptid. So I was excited going into this one. The plot of Below is there's this woman who's traveling alone on a highway, and she meets this trucker at this truck stop and ends up striking up a cautious friendship with him in terms of him keeping her company via a radio while she's traveling alone. The truck then, when she's following it down the highway, goes over a bridge and crashes into the side and is ending up at the bottom of this hill. She is communicating with him over the radio and tries to go save him. And is it Mothman that caused the truck to crash? Maybe. There was like one plot point in this that had me flabbergasted and I was really interested in, but then I felt they really didn't do enough with that plot point, and with the rest of the story I did find myself kind of glossing over it as we were going through, and other than that one plot point I didn't really feel absorbed in the story. So this one got a 3.25 from me. And book 3 that got 3.25 stars for me was Mr. Magic by Kiersten White. In this book, there is kind of a Mandela Effect television show called Mr. Magic, which everybody on the internet can remember specific people who were on it, can remember specific plots of the episodes, but no one can actually find any proof that this show exists. And the setup of the plot of the book is that one of the women who was on this show as a child, her father dies and she ends up reconnecting with some of the other children who are on the show at the same time as her, and they go to where they remember the show being filmed to do like a podcast revival kind of thing. And it is a horror novel, so spooky things start to happen as we unravel the truth about this mysterious television show. In the author's note at the end, the author does mention that this is very much about her life escaping a fundamentalist religion, which I did pick up on elements of throughout, but I feel like it could have pushed farther into that if that was the intention of the novel. There was like references to cult-like behavior, but it seemed very subtle if that was the ultimate point of this novel. There were some interesting elements in terms of the lore behind this show, and it was also mixed media, so they'd bring in like Reddit threads and things like that, and I thought some of that element was interesting, but I felt like the plot at the end didn't really have a payoff, and I didn't particularly like the decision that the character made at the very end. This one got a 3.25. Moving on to 3.5 stars, the first one, From Dead to Worse by Charlene Harris. This is the 8th book in the Sookie Stackhouse mystery series. In terms of the plot of this one of the reasons it got 3.5 and not higher is because the plot's kind of all over the place. There is a plot line about her witch roommate who has to confess to her mentor about some magic she made that went messed up. There's some plot lines in here about a war between the different werewolves, and there's a plot line in here about a hostile takeover within the vampire government. There was a lot going on in here, and I think this tried to do too much. So you were, here's the issue and here's how it was solved, and then we're on to the next issue and how that was solved. So this one gets 3.5 because of that element of the plot, that there was just a lot going on. But I am happy to announce, spoiler, there's timestamps if you want to skip forward to the next book. She finally is no longer with fucking Quinn. I hated that guy. Every time he called her babe, my skin crawled. Please don't bring him back in any future books. He's just gone. Goodbye. No longer want to read about Quinn. And the other book that got 3.5 from me is You've Lost a Lot of Blood by Eric LaRocca. This is a novella written by Eric LaRocca, so it is going to be horror. The setup of You Lost a Lot of Blood is a true crime documentary style intro where there is this man who is potentially a killer, and you are seeing both his own musings and writings and some recordings of him, but then also having the story that he wrote. And I thought the story that he wrote was a lot more interesting than his actual life, and the jump between the two I just was not enjoying. So this one gets a 3.5 for me. I can see what the attempt was, and I enjoyed half of the story, but the other elements I just thought were weird and gross and didn't enjoy them. So 3.5. Eric LaRocca remains mid for me, unfortunately. Okay, 3.75 stars. The first one was Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. This is the first book in a series and is going to be my audiobook series for the moment. The setup of this book is our main character, Rachel, is dating Nick, and Nick invites Rachel, who is an American-born Chinese person, to Singapore to go to a wedding. And what he doesn't warn her about in advance is that he's filthy stinking rich. And so is everyone involved in that wedding. And while I went into this book with passing knowledge of the movie from like clips on TikTok, I wasn't expecting it to have other POVs other than Rachel's, but it was so fascinating getting the perspectives of other people who were raised in this rich environment. All the inner workings and the way that the gossip spread and misinformation got around to all these gossipy old ladies, I found that so interesting. It was so fun, that element of it. The plot was just alright, and the fact that Nick didn't warn Rachel, like at all, about any of this drove me crazy. But I had some fun with this, so I gave it a 3.75. Next on the 3.75s is a Discworld novel, and that was Eric. This is, luckily for me, the last Rincewind book for a while in the series. In this book, Rincewind is accidentally summoned by someone trying to summon a demon, and he gets bound essentially to the will of this child. Obviously, as a child, he wishes for riches and the most beautiful women alive, and because of the way the magic is working in the scenario, Rincewind has the ability to like grant those, but kind of in the genie way where you're not getting exactly what you asked for. I give this a 3.75. It was short, which I think was good for me because I can't stand Rincewind for much longer than I had to. I kind of enjoyed this one because of the literary references. One of the wishes is that he gets to be with the most beautiful woman alive, and the magic transports them to the Trojan War, very specifically the story that is in the Iliad, and there's references to the Odyssey, and I thought this was fun for those literary references. I think Terry Pratchett is really hitting his stride now, so I gave this one 3.75, which is good for me considering Rincewind was in it. And the next book, something I have been actively avoiding reading for 2 years now, ever since I joined the Book Talk BookTube community. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas because it was picked by my book club. And being a Fourth Wing hater, I have low expectations of what I'm going to enjoy in romantasy at this point. But I gave this one 3.75. There are elements in here I enjoy. I didn't think the smut was quite as smutty as people led me to believe it would be, given that people refer to this as fairy porn. I don't know what I've read. Maybe I'm just raised by fan fiction that I considered most of that to be tame. But there's some interesting world building here which surprised me. I think this is the one time where being spoiled for a book actually helped me enjoy it more. I will put timestamps, so skip ahead if you don't want the spoilers. The fact that I knew that Tamlin was an endgame helped me like this more, because I didn't like Tamlin. I thought that the relationship was very shallow. Who I did like, though, was his friend in the fox mask, whose name is escaping me right now. And I am interested to see how they go from, like, that being the main romance to Rhysand, I think. So I might actually continue this series, which is weird for me. But I finally read ACOTAR, so 3.75 for that one. Okay, now we are getting into the 4 stars. So we're getting into the good bits here. First, The Me You Love in the Dark by Scotty Young. This is a graphic novel about an artist who moves into this creepy house to try to inspire her art, and she ends up falling in love with some weird-ass entity that's in the house, and it turns toxic very quickly. I thought the art was very cool in this one, I thought the story was compelling, and it was 1 volume and we're done. So no need to drag the story out for any longer than it needed to tell the story it needed to tell. Next at 4 stars was Assassin of Reality by Sergei and Marina Dyanchenko. This is a sequel to Vita Nostra, which was in my top books of 2023. The sequel only gets a 4 star from me. It did capture some of the things that I liked about the first book, the writing style, some of the intrigue, but it did just start to feel a little bit repetitive at some point about the study, and no, she can't study, she's going to fail the test. And I also felt like I was missing chunks, because as I found out, while this is the second book published in English, there's actually 2 books technically between the first one and this one in the series that haven't been translated. So I do kind of wonder if I was missing some context from those 2 full-ass other books. That would have improved the experience of this one. So 4 stars here, because it just couldn't quite reach back up to the level that I had in my love for Vita Nostra. Next is another graphic novel. This is Bloodstain by Linda Sejic. This is about a woman who takes a job working as an assistant for someone she thinks might be an evil scientist, and we're really starting to develop the relationship in volume 4. They resolve a lot of the miscommunications that they've had throughout the first 3, so I think now it's kind of getting into an actual plot and building on their relationship and how their dynamic is going to be. So I gave this one a 4 star. I did enjoy it again. There were some cute elements here, and I'm looking forward to where we go from here. And 4 just seems to be the rating for graphic novels, because another one is The Silver Coin Volume 1. This one lists a huge list of authors, so picture will have it. This is about a cursed coin that helps you get your desires in the bloodiest way possible. So each issue within the volume is the story of a different person who has found this coin and gotten their dreams in the most nightmarish way possible. So far, a lot of it has been kind of standalone of person found coin, this thing happened. Next issue, person found coin, this thing happens. So I am interested to see how they make a cohesive narrative, or if it is just going to be basically a collection of one-offs. I gave this one 4 star. Art style was cool. There was some gruesomeness in here that I found intriguing, and I'm interested to see where the series goes. Also gave a 4 to Alice in Borderland Volume 8. This is a manga series about someone who finds themselves in Borderland, where people have to keep their visa up to date by completing deadly games and winning. Now that we're in Volume 8, there's been a bit more revealed about how the games work and are designed, and in Volume 8, there were a lot of clever mind game set up here, and I thought that that was very interesting. We're getting some of the backstories about the people who run the games, and 4 stars from me. I think this is coming to an end in the next couple issues, so I'm interested to see how they wrap all of this up, and I still am really enjoying the series in terms of all the different clever games that they come up with and the motivations of the people completing them. And the last 4-star is Strange Planet by Nathan W. Pyle. This is a cartoon book where the author-artist uses aliens to describe everyday things in our world as alien and strange as possible. So the fact that we crave that star damage in the form of a tan and things like that. I used to follow his account on Twitter, so since I no longer have an X account, it was nice to get to see some of those comics again in a book form. This won't be a 5-star my favorite book of the year, but it was fun and I did enjoy reading it, so it got a 4. So that is all the 4 stars. Next, the 4.25. The first is Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes. This is dark academia vibes, a school where you are taught the perfect murder. You must come to the school prepared with a murder victim and why their murder is justified, and they help you gain the skills to plan your thesis, which is the murder of the person you want offed. This one had a bit of a slow start for me. I was enjoying the vibes of the school, but the plot didn't really catch me immediately. But then once we did get towards the latter and people were executing on their theses, I really liked that part of it. It was a really fun way to do murder without being gruesome. It was more about the cleverness of the plan than the brutality of the murder, which I thought was a really fun way to do it. So this one got a 4.25 for me, and I think the extra 0.25 is for the cover alone, because isn't it beautiful? The other 4.25 for the month of January was How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This is about a virus that ends up being released from the permafrost due to the warming of our globe, and the initial victims of the disease are all children. This is told through a series of vignettes, and you see different people's experiences with this virus throughout its progression. So the first basic team to be infected with it, the way that society is dealing with it when it's only targeting children, how they're dealing with it once it starts to spread to adults, and then finally what they do once there's finally a cure. I thought some of the concepts of the vignettes were really interesting. There's one early on specifically about a euthanasia roller coaster. That one made me cry. It was so well written. And I thought some of the earlier ones were a lot stronger than the ones towards the end, but overall, all were beautifully written, all had strong concepts. So this got a 4.25 for me. Some of the stories just weren't particularly for me towards the end. And the 2 books that tied for my best of January at 4.5 stars. The first is Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket. This book is written by Lemony Snicket of the Series of Unfortunate Events series, and it is about a man who wakes up, has his breakfast, and then finds a note saying he had poison for breakfast. And he then has to investigate what exactly in his breakfast was poisoned, and I thought this was so beautifully written, as Lemony Snicket does. I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Patrick Warburton, so the voice of it was very fun, and I know this is aimed more towards children, but I really enjoyed it, so 4.5 from me for Poison for Breakfast. And the last book that I read in January that I am able to talk about is The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiri. This is a novel within the Percy Jackson universe. Nico D'Angelo, who is a son of Hades, and his boyfriend, who is a son of Apollo. So you have one who's all darkness and doom, and one who is roses and sunshine. The plot holding this together is that Nico is given a quest to save a friend from the depths of Tartarus and has to go through the underworld with his boyfriend accompanying him to save the dude in Tartarus, who Bob, I think it is. I thought that the action of the book, it was really well done. Some of my favorite Percy Jackson books have specifically been the ones where they're going through the underworld, because I feel like they can do a lot more interesting things with the monsters when that is the setting of the plot. And this one held true to that theory, and I thought that the relationship between Nico and his boyfriend was very cute. These are my children, I will protect them with my life. The story Nico tells about how he came out made me cry. I am so glad that the children of today get to grow up with stories like this and normalizing queer identities, when that was very much not something that I had growing up and would have really appreciated. So that one was very sweet, but also with some good action, so 4.5. And that is all of the books that I can talk about that I read in January. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave in the comments down below what the best book you read in January was. I have left links in the description to more information about the St. Martin's Press boycott, as well as links to my Instagram if you want some sneak peeks of what I read throughout the month. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. I enjoyed it. Did I?